Hello and welcome to the Reviews Brothers. Now, if you've followed this channel for a while, you'll know that I have more than a passing fondness for the Doom games. In fact, I have a hard time deciding if Doom or Super Metroid take the top spot for my favourite game of all time. This means that I've owned Doom on just about every console that I've owned, and it was available for. And that's what we're looking at here today, a bunch of Doom ports that came to our home consoles. Keep in mind that I'm only talking about official ports, well, apart from the last one, so there'll be no pregnancy tests or McDonald's drive-through screens here. It's just ports that came out on consoles. As always though, be sure to shout at me in the comments for any others that I should try in the future. Now how about I shut up and we take a look at some games. Here is Doom on the Super Nintendo. I believe this was the first time it came to a non-PC system. Now, I would assume that you know the story and basic gameplay of Doom, so we won't be talking about that. Well, okay, just a little. You're a marine and you're on a base on Mars that's been overrun with demons from hell, so you go through a bunch of maze-like levels collecting keys and weapons and taking down the hordes of monsters. It's awesome. Now, all things considered, the SNES version of Doom is actually quite impressive, but as you'd expect, it has had to have a few changes to let it run properly on the system. The first thing you notice are the graphics, which have had a significant downgrade. Floors and ceilings don't have any textures, though to be honest you don't really notice this after a while. The textures on the environment are considerably more pixelated here as well, but they don't look awful. You get 22 levels in total, only 5 have been cut. The ones that are here have had slight changes, but nothing major. The third episode has to be unlocked by completing the first 2 on the Hurt Me Plenty or higher difficulties, which I didn't realise until going back to play this. And yes, this is one that I did play back in the day on my actual SNES. One of my friends had it and lent it to me and I loved it, even though I had the PC version as well. All of the enemies and weapons are here as well, though again there are some slight changes. Firstly, enemies will only ever face you, and you'll never get to see their backs or sides. This means you can't sneak up on them like you can in other versions. Also, there's much less animation here, and it looks a bit sped up and odd. Some of the noises are different as well. I'm guessing that's down to memory. So a lot of enemies use the imp noises rather than having their own, but that's not really a problem. The weapons feel good to use, but annoyingly, when you get the shotgun, you can only kill one enemy at a time, rather than like the other versions where a well-placed shot can take down 2 or 3 enemies in one go. You'll notice that with the chain gun the sound goes strange every now and then, and what's pretty amusing is that if you use the rocket launcher or plasma gun, if you're running forward while shooting, you can actually run faster than your own bullets and shoot yourself with them. Something else that's missing here are there's no blood splats or marks on the wall when you shoot, so there's no real visual indication of when you hit or miss something. Control-wise, it's actually pretty good. You use the D-pad to move and the shoulder buttons to strafe. Annoyingly, you can't turn and strafe at the same time, meaning you can't circle strafe, and it's mainly for dodging left and right. The shooting is responsive though, and the button layouts make sense. And you gotta mention the music, which actually sounds awesome here on the SNES. Overall, it's an impressive port for the system, and surprisingly, far from the worst one that we'll see today. Doom came to the Sega 32X rather than the Mega Drive, and again, it's actually a pretty good representation of the game, all things considered. You do only get 17 levels here, which is basically just the first 2 episodes, nothing from the later ones, and no secret levels. This also means that the only way to get the BFG 9000 weapon is by using a cheat code, as it doesn't appear at all in the first 2 episodes. But other than that, this port isn't really that bad. Graphically, it looks pretty decent. It's got a higher resolution than the Super Nintendo, as you'd expect, and you get all the textures here, though like the SNES version, enemies will still always face you no matter what. This means you can't trick them into attacking one another. Enemies can damage and kill one another, but they won't actively fight like they do in the PC version. It does also look kinda weird the way that enemies constantly slide left and right thanks to the frames of animation that have been removed. Something I actually quite like from this version is that it's been made brighter than some of the other ports. This makes getting around a lot of the levels easier, which is nice. Interestingly, there have been a few small tweaks on some of the levels, mainly in areas where you're in pits that you can fall into, or places that will rise up, where these are often completely removed and now just a flat area. I wonder why this was, especially as the Super Nintendo was able to keep these parts in, not that it really makes a difference. There's no save or password feature here, which is a little odd. Instead, you can just choose to start from any of the levels right from the start menu, which I was kind of surprised at. You don't even have to unlock them first, they're just there. Though if you do want the proper ending, you'll need to play through them all in one go. If you die, you restart the level you were on without any weapons, which can make some levels nearly impossible without required ammo counts. I did also feel that this was actually a pretty tough version, as the enemy seems to be way more aggressive here. Monsters like the imps and cacodemons especially fire their projectiles at a crazy fast rate, and they can kill you in just a few seconds if you're not careful. And speaking of enemies, the Cyber Demon, Spectre and Spider Demon have all been removed, so basically they took out the bosses. That's a bit of a bold move. It does run smoothly though, and I have to give it that. The action takes place in a smaller window, but it runs smoothly and the controls are actually very responsive. Even with 3 buttons, the controller is easy and you know what you need to do. You've got a strafe button, so there's no circle strafing, making dodging and fast enemy attacks pretty tricky. Something they really messed up though is the music, which is by far the worst version of what is usually an awesome soundtrack, but that's something that's plagued a lot of Sega games at the time. I really wasn't a fan of most of the sound in Sega games at this time. The actual sound effects though are spot on. Overall, this isn't a bad port at all. It runs way better than I thought it was going to. It's just a shame that the music sucks and they had to cut out so much of the content. Still, I would have been happy with it back in the day if I had it for the system. Here is Doom for the Atari Jaguar, and this is actually the first time I've played a Jaguar game. Not a real one though, this is being emulated on my Steam Deck, but don't tell anyone. Honestly, I was expecting this to be total crap, but actually it's a pretty decent port. As with all the ports of this time though, some changes have been made thanks to the limitations. Firstly, there are no episodes, instead you just play through all the levels in one continuous go. Interestingly, even though a few levels have been cut out, you actually get 2 brand new maps for this port, though I didn't get to see them. And the levels look good. There's 24 of them here, and they all have half decent textures for a home port, and the lighting is pretty good here as well. I do think that the textures are reused a lot more here though, with some areas looking a bit different to how I remembered them, I'm pretty sure. The levels themselves have the same slight tweaks that were present in the other ports, mainly getting rid of areas that you could fall down or could be raised and lowered, but not the elevators. You don't get spectres here again. I'm guessing the Jaguar was just not great at transparencies. Instead, where they normally were, you now just get regular old pinky demons. And the other enemies all look good enough. You actually get to see more than just the front of them in this version, making it easier to have them fight each other if you want to, and you can sneak into a room without being seen if they're facing the wrong way. Enemies do seem to move a hell of a lot faster here, and they'll attack really quickly, which is annoying, especially anything that fires a projectile, as these move at the speed of light, so any levels that have lots of imps and cacodemons now are incredibly difficult. Don't worry about the Cyber Demon or Spider Demon though, as they aren't here at all. In terms of the actual game running, I have to say it is pretty smooth. The control is responsive, though I did have a slight issue playing the way that I am, as I don't have the crazy buttons to make most of the weapon changes. I'd need to do some remapping, and I don't really care enough to do that. Let's face it, I'll probably never play this version again. You do have a strafe button, but again, no ability to circle strafe. Also, the strafe button is also used to open doors, so if you're in a doorway trying to fight, you'll usually just keep opening and closing the door at the same time, which is very annoying. There's still no save or password, however now levels will remain unlocked once you've played them. This is cool, so you can come back to wherever you left off and you don't need to restart from the beginning every time, but you won't start with all your weapons. The biggest omission from this version though is definitely the music. There is none at all, and it's so noticeable. The game is really quiet and doesn't even have any ambient sounds to compensate. It's just the guns and groans. This really does affect the game and makes it feel incomplete. Which is a shame, as the gameplay is actually pretty solid and probably quite high up there in the rankings of these ports. If only they'd sorted out those speedy demons and their lightning fast projectiles. Here is Doom on the mighty 3DO, and this is by far the worst version of Doom that I've ever played, but also the best in one area. Now, I have seen videos in the past about this one's troubled development and crazy deadlines which explain why it's so bad, but it is still bad. As you'd expect by now, not all the levels here are present, and the ones that are here have been simplified in areas where things go up and down. But man, the whole thing just runs so badly. It's a real chore to play. The graphics are about on par with the other versions with the same pixelated textures, enemies and weapons don't look too bad, but the play window is tiny. Now you do get a few different options, mainly to make it smaller, so it runs a little better. But no matter which window size you use, it runs worse than any other version here, including the Super Nintendo one. It's crazy. There is a hell of a lot of slowdown, and the game already runs at about 3 frames an hour. Any wide open space that has an enemy or two in it just completely brings the game to its knees. This makes controlling things a real pain in the ass, as you can't be precise with anything that you do. But hey, a single person was given 10 weeks to port this across, so really what do you expect? And actually it's probably quite impressive with how much is here for just 10 weeks work. The only thing that isn't the worst here is the music, which is actually brilliant. All the tracks have been re-recorded and sound amazing, really getting you in the mood to kill demons. Apparently they also meant to include a whole load of full motion cutscenes, which would have been awesome, but thanks to the tight turnaround these never appeared, which is a real shame. But then again, maybe it's a blessing as the game still sucks. Don't play this one unless you have to have everything Doom. Doom for the PS1 is a version that I always used to play at my friend Rob's house, and is easily the best port from this era. Interestingly, it's actually got Doom and Doom 2 in here, and you can choose which one you want to play through. If you choose Doom, which is what we're focusing on here, then you don't need to worry about the chapters. Instead, you just play through every level sequentially. And unlike all the other ports, this one actually had some improvements made to it. Once again, some of the levels have been removed and others have had changes to the geometry again, to make it a little simpler. But there's actually 8 brand new levels here that you won't find anywhere else, though some of these are part of Doom 2, not Doom 1. The textures have been given the usual console treatment, being more pixelated here than on the PC, but on the PlayStation version has added a lot of new lighting effects, noticeably a sort of neon effect with red, blue and yellow lights being found all over the place, often indicating when you're in an area that you might need to find a key of that colour, which is actually kind of helpful. The game is noticeably darker though, and I don't mean in tone, I mean it's just literally darker, and much harder to see what the hell is going on. I've actually boosted the brightness in this footage here to help be able to see what the hell is happening. It can make some of the maps much harder to get around, and I found myself using the map a lot more here, though that doesn't show enemies, so can also cause problems. And speaking of enemies, they're all present and correct, and actually there's even a new one, which is basically a more powerful spectre with a very dark shadow colour and take 5 or 6 shotgun blasts to take down, rather than usual 2 or 3. A lot of enemy sound effects have changed. In fact, almost all of the sound effects have changed here. Weapons and explosions are meatier, and enemies make new groans and screams, which are all quite good, and I recognise them from Doom 64. I'm not entirely sure which one came first. The controls here are great and work well. The abundance of shoulder buttons on the PlayStation pad means you can circle strafe, shoot, change weapons, open doors, all at the same time if you need to, and it all feels natural. And it does run decently. I did notice that there was a fair bit of slowdown in some of the tight areas with 3 or more enemies though. There's no music, instead you get ambient noise, which again I'm pretty sure is the same as the Doom 64 stuff. I would have preferred the music, but the sounds here aren't too bad. Overall, as I said earlier, I think this is probably the best port from the 90s. The controls are good, it looks good, it runs well enough, and it's just generally a fun version to play. The Sega Saturn version of Doom is a port of the PlayStation 1 version, but not a very good one. As the Sega Saturn wasn't that great for 3D, they had to take out the funky lighting and keep the more traditional look of the PC version, which actually I don't mind really, as it's always going to be the best one. But you can really tell that the Sega Saturn is struggling here. The frame rate is pretty terrible. You still get a choice of playing through Doom or Doom 2 with the same missing levels and extra ones included, but sadly the Saturn just can't seem to handle it all that well. Even just walking around areas with no monsters, the frame rate drops all the time, and the jerky movement makes it harder to aim accurately. Also, thanks to the Saturn's problems with transparencies, you get a strange mesh effect for Spectre enemies, and also now areas that should have some shadows just now look like a weird mesh, and it's very out of place. The pixels have all been bumped up to 11 here compared to the PS1 port as well, which is a real shame. It makes it hard to tell what things are, and even means that some items and pickups don't appear until you're very close to them. The resolution of the Saturn also means that things look a little squashed and weird. You still get the new sound effects and music here, if you can call it music, but it seems to be repeated a lot more than on the PS1 version, but it's ambient sounds, so who really cares? Overall, this is just not a very good port of the game. It is still leagues ahead of the 3DO version, but I really think it could have been a lot better. I actually own this for my real Saturn, which is what you're seeing here, and I've got to say, I was hoping for a lot more. Sad times. As is written in the scriptures of old, Doom got a port to the Game Boy Advance, as it must do for any and every electronical device on the planet. Now, I don't really mind this, as Doom is easily in my top 10 video games of all time, but how is it on the handheld? It's fine. Now, you all know Doom, or at least I hope you do. You're a space marine and you're taking on the forces of hell after they're unleashed on a Mars base. Oh, and they also killed your rabbit, so you need to get revenge for that. And yes, that's all true. You know the drill, you explore levels, find keys, kill bad guys, and get to the exit. That's all there is to it. And this is a fine port. Of course, it's not a patch on the PC version, but it is better than the SNES version. There have been a few changes. For starters, the levels have been simplified in a few areas, but it's nothing major. The levels are mostly the same, but there's geometry that's been dumbed down or removed completely in areas where it's not really needed. Also, the blood has been changed from red to green as it's Nintendo, and there seem to be fewer enemies in the game, though there's still more than enough. Other than that though, it's mostly all here. As far as I could tell, all the levels are present, which is nice, and they do actually look surprisingly good on the small screen. The same with the enemies. They are very pixely from a distance, but they don't look too bad close up, keeping most of their animations, but sadly they don't explode into chunks in this version. I'm not sure if that's because they'd be too gory, or if it's just because they couldn't. The actual gameplay itself is pretty smooth though, for a Game Boy Advance first-person shooter anyway. It's less than 30 frames a second, but does control pretty well, and you move kinda quickly, and it's easy to aim. The sound and music here though are excellent, and almost all of the tracks from the original are present. If you do need some Doom on the go, this isn't your worst option, though it is probably available on your phone these days, but who knows. Anyway, if you do want some Doom on the go, give this one a try. Let's jump forward a few generations now to the Xbox 360, which got a port of Doom that might even be my favourite. It was also released on the PS3. You could either get it digitally, or if you bought the Doom 3 BFG edition, both Doom 1 and 2 are included on there as well. This is just a straight up port of the PC version, with no bells or whistles, which I guess is kind of a good and bad thing. Here, everything is set out just like the PC version. You choose your difficulty and your episode, and you get to killing monsters. Now, being on such a more powerful hardware, this is, as far as I can tell, and remember, I'm just looking at these from someone who likes playing them, I don't know about technical stuff. This is a perfect port of the PC version. You've got all the levels here, all the enemies, all the weapons, and all the fun. The game keeps the PC graphics, but makes them nice and crisp in HD, though they haven't added anything to them. I think it might have been nice to maybe have an option to make some more upscaled graphics. In fact, I can't believe there is no official remake that's ever been done for the original games, remaking them now but with all new graphics. That seems to all be down to modders these days. Anyway, the game is still just as fantastic as ever, and really there isn't much to say about it, as it's an exact port of the PC version. Playing with the controller is easy, and the controls are super fast and responsive. You change weapons with the shoulder buttons to cycle through them, and using the twin sticks to circle strafe is super easy to do. The sound and music are the classic originals, but again it might have been nice to have the option to use some from other versions, especially with the music, but I guess licensing is a pain in the ass and they have to pay all sorts of people for it. But yeah, if you're still rocking an Xbox 360 or PS3, then do yourself a favour and get a copy of this if you can. It even has achievements in it, which actually brings me on to something that's annoying. Some of them are for online multiplayer and getting a certain number of kills, and as you can imagine, no one is playing this game anymore, so I can't get the last 2 achievements that I need. I hate online achievements. Doom also got a release on the PS4 generation, which includes the modern PS5s, etc. This is actually an anniversary edition of the game. You get the full Doom experience, and really there's not a whole lot more to say about it. It's a perfect conversion of the game on the PS4 and Xbox, whatever they're called these days, and Switch. The game looks awesome with its classic graphics, which look sharp, but again, nothing's been altered, which is a bit of a shame. You also get the same music and sound effects from the original, which isn't a bad thing of course, but some options to use other versions would have been nice, especially as it's the anniversary one. Actually, having said that, these newer versions have made slight changes to the health kits with different pictures on them, and the green cross instead of a red one. I wonder if this is a copyright thing. It's a minor change, but it's quite noticeable for some reason. The controls are still super fast and responses, though I have to say that I'm not sure I really like the weapon switching here. You still use the shoulder buttons, but instead of just going to the next weapon, instead you get a picture of the weapons that appear at the top of the screen, and you scroll to the one that you want, then wait a second, and it will switch. This means that swapping weapons isn't instant and it can take valuable seconds to get the one that you want. Now I know this technically makes sense as you don't have to cycle all the way through the weapons, but by now for me, and really most players, I tend to know exactly how many button presses I would need to get from the shotgun to the plasma rifle, so I could do that without having to wait half a second or so for the game to know which one I was choosing. One of the best things about the Anniversary Edition though is that you get to use mods, which I think is the first time that this has happened on a console. The way it works is that you can go to a mod menu and there's a pretty decent selection of mods that you can download and activate whenever you want to. Now this does mean that you can't add your own, not on the console versions anyway, I don't know about the PC. But there are more than 20 mods totaling over 100 new levels, extra weapons and enemies. Some of the mods are just map packs, whereas others are full-on total conversions like Wrecker, changing Doom into a Viking setting, and there's even one set in the future. New mods do get added every now and then, but I do have to say I thought there'd be a hell of a lot more than there are here, and I'm surprised there aren't hundreds on there. Still, the selection they have are all of a high quality and tend to be ones that have won awards in the official Doom mod community, and they're all worth playing through if you're like me and you just love playing Doom. You also have the trophy and achievements here as well, most of which are the same as the ones on the Xbox 360. This means that you still have online play if you want to get all of them, which is a pain as I don't know anyone else that owns this game, so I can never find any games to join. You can play local multiplayer, including 4-player split-screen co-op, which is also awesome. But still, this is probably the best version of Doom, even though I just said that about the Xbox 360 one, but thanks to the addition of mods, you can't really go wrong. So if you don't own Doom by now, do yourself a favour and get it, it's super cheap. And now as a cheeky little bonus, here is Quest Doom VR for the Oculus Quest, shamelessly taken from the video I did a while back about Team Beef, who have done an amazing job of porting Doom 1, 2 and 3 to the Oculus Quest.
Quest GZDoom, which, as you likely guessed, is for all your Doom needs. Well, Doom and Doom 2 that is. This is an incredible program that lets you play both Doom and Doom 2 in full VR, and what's more is that it supports almost every mod you can throw at it, but more on that in a bit. The controls here are spot on, and you use the thumbsticks to move, and you aim and shoot as you'd expect. Everything is fully customizable, so you can make sure to have the control setup that works for you. You can even adjust your movement speed, field of view, and just about everything else you would ever need to. Playing Doom and Doom 2 in VR is great fun, even without any mods. The only thing that looks a bit strange are your weapons, which still use the same 2D sprites as the base game, so they cut off at the same places, but I guess that makes sense. However, there are a load of options for you to add 3D weapon models, and this is a must. Every weapon in the game has been given a 3D model that's fully animated and even includes reload animations where appropriate. You can even change the enemies to 3D models. This is cool for the base game, but they don't have a ton of animation. However, it does help to make things a little bit more immersive. I would say if you're playing just the base game, this is the way to do it, as the 3D models are a lot of fun. However, remember how I just said that the mods still work? Well, that includes the awesome Brutal Doom mod, which you already know from the footage being shown. The Brutal Doom mod is just incredible, and playing it in VR is honestly my favourite way to play Doom now. You can't have the 3D enemies in this mode, but that really doesn't matter, as the increased gore, location-specific damage and moody lighting coupled with the awesome metal soundtrack are sure to get you pumping. The game is so fast-paced and everything just runs so smoothly that you'll be blowing enemies to pieces and having the time of your life while you're doing it. On the Quest GZDoom launcher homepage, you can also download dozens of extra mods and map packs directly through the app itself. These include things like the TNT and Plutonia experiment add-ons, and a load of other fan-made ones that add hundreds of new maps, enemies, weapons, sounds, and more. You can even add your own mods that you've downloaded by copying them over in SideQuest, and they'll appear in the menus. And yes, it does mean you can play the Castlevania, Evil Dead, Mario, Sonic and Zelda mods in full VR. It really is incredible. And just when you thought it couldn't get any better, you can even add other games that use the engine here, like Heretic, which also has its own 3D models to use. You can even run Chex Quest games through this, if you want to murder some serial slime in VR. The amount of options here is just amazing, and there's no way I can go through them all. The menus are very easy to navigate, and you can turn your mods on and off as often as you want. The app even tells you when certain mods are incompatible with each other, so you know which ones are causing the game not to work. This really is one of my go-to games on the Quest, and I never get tired of playing new Doom maps in full VR. Even though I've sunk a ton of hours into this, I've already barely scratched the surface with the combinations of available mods, texture packs, weapons and more. This, for me, is the definitive way to play Doom.
So there you go, a load of home console versions of Doom that you may or may not want to try. Which ones have you played, and what other ones are there out there that I should check out? Be sure to let me know in the comments below. And now, all that's left for me to say is thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time.